An Olympic coach says, "That wasn't good enough, do it again." They don't do the work for the athlete, but many leaders do. And this is the habit that's holding you back. Picture the training facility, the Winter Olympics. A figure skater is working on their quad jump, the element that could make or break their entire program. They've attempted it 17 times today. 17 times they've fallen. The coach stands at the boards watching. Every fiber of their being wants to put the skates on, demonstrate the technique, physically guide the rotation. They know exactly what needs to adjust. They could fix it in 5 minutes, but they don't move. Instead, they say again, "That wasn't good enough, do it again." Now shift to your office. Your team member brings you a project that's 80% there. You can see exactly what needs to happen. You know you can knock it out in 20 minutes, so you do. You take over, you make the edits, you send it off. Problem solved. Except you just created a bigger problem. I'm Dr. Kara, and I've spent over 2 decades working with leaders who are exhausted from carrying the weight that was never theirs to carry. Today, we are talking about the accountability gap, the space between what leaders think they're responsible for and what actually serves their teams. Most important, here's what most leadership advice won't tell you. Closing that gap has nothing to do with setting clear expectations or having harder conversation. It starts with understanding why you're stepping onto the ice in the first place. Let's ground this in what's actually happening in your world. You're in back-to-back meetings. Your calendar is color-coded chaos. Someone on your team is stuck on a deliverable, and you've got a dozen ways to unstick them. So you do. You rewrite their email, you handle the difficult call that they were going to have with the client, and you stay late fixing the presentation because it's faster than explaining what needs to change. You tell yourself you're being efficient. You're being helpful. You're actually making sure that the work gets done, right? What's actually happening? You're creating a team that waits for you to finish their work. The behavior looks like support, feels like leadership, but it's actually something entirely different. It's what I call borrowed accountability. You're borrowing responsibility that belongs to someone else. And every time you do it, you're making a silent deal. I don't trust you to handle this, so I'll handle it for you. The team learns this language first. They start bringing you half-finished work because they figured out you'll complete it. They stop pushing through hard parts because they know you'll jump in. The quality bar you're trying to maintain, well, that becomes your job alone. And you end up exhausted, micromanaging people that you genuinely respect, and then wondering why your talented team cannot function without you. This is the accountability gap. It's the distance between the person responsible for the outcome and the person doing the work to get there. When you close that gap by doing the work yourself, you're not helping. You're creating what researchers call learned helplessness, a documented phenomenon where repeated rescue erodes someone's belief in their own capability. You're also creating something else. You're telling yourself a story about control that feels true but isn't. Let me take you back to that Winter Olympic training facility, because what happens on that ice is exactly what most leaders miss. Think about what a speed skater faces. They're moving at nearly 40 miles per hour, inches away from the boards, navigating turns that create forces up to 4 Gs on their body. When they're racing, they're completely alone on that ice. The coach can't skate beside them. The coach can't adjust their blade angle mid-turn. They can't take over when their legs are screaming with lactic buildup. The only thing that gets them across the finish line is what they've built internally. The capacity to push through when everything hurts, to their trust technique when their mind is telling them to ease up, to complete what they've started, even when it's brutal. That's what the coach is building during all those training sessions. Not just physical conditioning, something psychological, unshakable trust in their own ability to finish. Watch what happens when that figure skate falls their 18th attempt at the quad. The coach doesn't rush onto the ice. They don't demonstrate the jump themselves. They ask, what happened in the air? Where did you feel the rotation break down? They're making the athlete name what they noticed, identify their own breaking point, figure out the adjustment. Because on competition day, when the skater is alone on the Olympic ice with millions watching, the coach will be standing behind the boards. The only voice that matters then is the one inside the skater's head. The internal capacity that they've developed to receive what's happening in their body, perceive what it means for full execution, and respond in real time. That is the receive, perceive, respond framework in action. And it's the same process that your team needs to develop. Here's the critical part. Winter Olympic coaches can only do this because they've done their own internal work first. They've dealt with their need to control outcomes. They separated their worth from their athlete's performance. They've recognized that their value isn't measured by how much they do for their athlete. It's measured by how much capacity they build in them. Think about a ski jumping coach. They send their athlete down that in run at 60 miles per hour, launching them into the air with nothing but the technique that they've practiced. The coach has to be anchored in their role. They cannot be reactive. They can't panic when the athlete's form wavers mid-flight. They've learned to sit in the discomfort of watching someone work through difficulty without rescuing them. Most leaders haven't learned that yet, and it's not because you don't care about your team. It's because nobody taught you that the discomfort you feel when you don't jump in, that discomfort is information. It's telling you something about what you believe about yourself as a leader. So let's talk about what's actually driving this pattern, because this is where leadership development usually gets it wrong. Standard advice tells you to delegate better, to trust your team more, to let go of perfectionism. But that's like telling the bobsled driver to just relax as they're hurtling down an icy track at 90 miles per hour. It doesn't work because it's not addressing what's underneath the behavior. You're managing your own anxiety, and that anxiety is rooted in something specific. The fear that if the work isn't perfect, it reflects on your worth as a leader. This is the accountability gap from the inside. You've unconsciously linked your value to outcomes that you don't fully control. So when those outcomes are at risk, when someone's work isn't quite there yet, your nervous system treats it like a threat to your identity. Your brain is trying to protect you. It's saying, if this goes wrong, people will see that you're not as competent as they think. Better to step in and make sure it's right. This is what I call the control reflex. It's not about the work. It's about soothing the fear that you're not enough. Here's what makes this particularly tricky. The behavior actually works in the short term. When you take over, the project improves. The client is happy. The deadline, it's met. Your brain gets a hit of relief. You see, you're competent. You did save the day. But that relief is temporary, and it comes at a steep, because every time that you close the accountability gap by doing the work yourself, you're reinforcing two damaging beliefs, one in you and one in your team. You're reinforcing the belief that you have to control the outcomes to be valuable. And you're reinforcing your team's belief that they can't handle challenges without you. This creates what researchers call the exhaustion rescue cycle. You become more essential, which makes you more exhausted, which makes you more likely to jump in because you're the only one who knows how everything works. Meanwhile, your team is experiencing something too. They're dealing with what I call borrowed worth. The sense that their value comes from your approval rather than their own competence. They stop developing internal standards for excellence because they're constantly measuring themselves against your standards and coming up short. The research is clear. Teams led by managers who overfunction actually underperform over time. A study in Administrative Science Quarterly found that leader over-involvement reduces team psychological safety and creative problem solving. Your team stops taking risks because they learned that taking risks means you'll take over. Think about what would happen if an Olympic curling coach grabbed the broom mid-match and started sweeping for the athlete. Not only would it be against the rules, it would send a devastating message. I don't trust you to read the ice. I don't believe you can make the shot without me. That athlete would never develop the subtle perception required to adjust to pressure and speed in real time. They'd always be looking to the coach for answers instead of building internal mastery. That's exactly what's happening with your team. So you're stuck doing more work, building less capacity, and wondering why leadership feels so lonely. The way out isn't through better time management or clear delegation. It's through recognizing what you're actually afraid of and building a different relationship with that fear. Here's the key that can change this. Understanding that your worth as a leader isn't determined by the perfection of every outcome. It's determined by the capacity that you build in the people you lead. This is the first pillar of my framework for connected leadership. Recognize value. You have to know your worth. I mean, truly know it, independent of whether this project succeeds or that team member meets the deadline. I'm not talking about lowering standards. I'm talking about understanding where your responsibility actually begins and ends. Winter Olympic coaches don't measure their worth by whether or not their athlete wins gold. They measure it by whether they've prepared that athlete to perform at the highest level when it matters. The outcome belongs to the athlete. The preparation belongs to the coach. Your job is the same. Your responsibility is to create conditions where your team can do their best work. Their responsibility is to do that work. When you confuse the two things, you end up with an accountability gap. You take on responsibility that isn't yours, which means nobody is fully responsible for anything. Here's the practical shift grounded in the receive, perceive, respond method. Receive what's actually happening without immediately acting on it. Your team member brings you work that's not ready. Before you fix it, pause. Receive the information. They're stuck. The work needs improvement. You feel the urge to take over. Just notice all of that without doing anything yet. Think about a snowboard halfpipe coach watching their athlete crash on a new trick. They receive what happened, the crash, the frustration, the impulse to step in, but they don't react immediately. They hold the space. Perceive is what this moment is really about. Ask yourself, is this about the work or is this about my need to control the outcome? Am I jumping in because it's genuinely necessary or because watching them struggle feels uncomfortable? What am I afraid will happen if I don't take over? This is where most leaders skip ahead. They receive and immediately respond, but the perception step, that's the moment where you name what you're actually dealing with. That's where transformation happens. Respond from your anchored place, not your anxious place. If the work genuinely needs your expertise, you can provide that without taking over. You can coach instead of rescue. I notice the argument loses momentum in the third paragraph. Walk me through what you're trying to accomplish there. You're keeping the accountability where it belongs, with them, while supporting their development. This is what that Winter Olympic coach does when they say, that wasn't good enough, do it again. They're not being cold. They're holding their athlete accountable to their own capability while refusing to rob them of the growth that comes from pushing through difficulty. That's what grace looks like in leadership. Not letting everything slide, not pretending mediocre work is excellent, but treating yourself and your team with dignity in the process of getting better. You acknowledge disappointment without making it mean something catastrophic about anyone's worth. This isn't ready yet doesn't become I'm a terrible leader or they're incompetent. It's just information about what needs to happen next. Your team starts to develop what that Olympic athlete has, internal accountability. They learn to complete their own work because they've built the capacity to push through difficulty. They develop standards that come from within, not from the fear of disappointing you. You get your time back, your energy back, and your team gets stronger. Moves towards the finish line with their dignity intact. Let me bring this full circle. That Winter Olympic coach standing at the boards watching their athlete fall for the 18th time, they're not being cold. They're not withholding help. They're doing something profound. They're trusting the work they've already done to prepare this athlete. They're recognizing that the athlete's value isn't contingent on nailing the jump. And they're refusing to rob that athlete of the experience of getting back up and trying again on their own power. They know something essential. When that athlete finally lands the quad, when they nail that downhill run, when they execute that perfect routine, the victory has to belong to the athlete. Not because the coach doesn't matter, but because the athlete needs to know deep in their bones that they did it themselves. That internal knowing is what carries them through Olympic competition when the pressure is suffocating and the coach can only watch from the sidelines. That's the leadership habit Olympic coaches avoid. They don't do the work for the people they're developing. You can take a page out of their book, not because you need to be tougher or less involved, but because you need to be more anchored in what you actually are responsible for. Your team doesn't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to rescue them from every challenge. They need you to build capacity within them, to hold space for their growth, and to trust that your worth isn't tied to whether they stumble along the way. When you close that accountability gap by staying in your lane, by coaching instead of doing, and supporting instead of taking over, you're not abandoning your team. You're giving them something more valuable than your intervention. You're giving them the chance to discover what they're actually capable of. And you're giving yourself something too. You're releasing the impossible burden of being responsible for everything and everyone. You're reclaiming your role as a leader who elevates and expands rather than the leader who exhausts and controls. That's connected leadership. And that's what it looks like to guide your team to the finish line without carrying them across it. The accountability gap exists because you've been trying to control outcomes that were never yours to control. But the control that you actually have is how you receive what's happening, perceive what it means, and respond from a place of clarity instead of fear. So the next time that you feel that urge to jump in, to take over, to fix yourself, take a beat and pause. Ask yourself, what are you really afraid of? Recognize your worth independent of this moment, and then do what Winter Olympic coaches do. Stand at the boards and let your team get back up and try again on their own power. They're capable of more than you've been giving them credit for, and so are you. I'm Dr. Kara. This is what it means to lead with connection instead of control, and it starts with knowing that your value was never in question in the first place.